canoe slalom. Is this even real? As a graphic designer, I believe one of the most important Olympic events is the designing of the pictograms illustrating each sport in any given Olympic Games. So, with Paris 2024 upon us, this is a review of the Olympic pictograms for the Paris Games. We're gonna get into the details looking at individual pictograms and also compare this set of designs to pictograms created for some earlier Olympics. And I'll talk about what makes this year's designs pretty unique compared to what's been done before. And I'll offer my opinions on just how successful I think these things are. If you're both humorless and impatient and don't want me to waste about 43 seconds of your life, you can skip ahead to about this timestamp right here. Otherwise, cheers! I'm coming to you today from my still new and unfinished studio in suboptimal lighting conditions, and I'm having every Olympic athlete's favorite energy drink, Coca-Cola. The zero-calorie version, of course. I'm health conscious. That's why I've added a slice of lime to this that I bought 3 weeks ago at my local supermarket. Farm to table. Anyway, let's get into it. If you're not a designer, you might think of these things as icons. And if you're even less of a graphic designer, you might think that these things are logos. But as graphic designers love to say, you're wrong. These are pictograms, and I love these things. Let's jump right in and take a look at the first three. This is archery, artistic gymnastics, and artistic swimming. First of all, I don't remember these sports being called artistic before. Artistic swimming, I assume, is what used to be called synchronized swimming. And artistic gymnastics, I guess, is just gymnastics. I wonder if the insertion of the word artistic is meant to somehow diffuse the inevitable controversies around how these events are scored? I don't know, interesting. Anyway, what you can begin to see already here is that this year's pictograms are built around this recurring geometry of crossing diagonal lines. And that theme is reinterpreted in all kinds of ways for each sport. So for archery, we have crossing diagonals in the form of arrows pointing towards the bullseye of a target. And for gymnastics, we have just a single diagonal. We're left to kind of imagine the other one. In this sense, it's a bit like a grid system, where there are organizing underlying principles for how to place graphic elements. And sometimes that structure is made literal and visible, and other times it's merely implied. And a great example is the pictogram for artistic swimming, where actually there's no diagonal lines at all, but the lines are replaced by swimsuits placed on those diagonals, replacing the crossing lines. So what I would say about these on first glance is I'm maybe a little bit surprised at the varying thickness of the lines. In the archery one, for example, I think if I was designing this as a single pictogram without worrying about how it needs to work as part of a broader family, my instinct would be to make the arrows as thick as the bows, and then I would possibly look to make fewer target rings so that each one could be thicker in order to better distinguish them from the outline of the target. Right now the outline there is fairly close in thickness to the target rings, so there's almost a bit of doubt about whether it's an outline or just a thinner ring by mistake. So if you look at the gymnastics one, I like that the diagonal lines for the rings are the same line width as the feet for the beams. But then I'm seeing that the beams are done in a thinner line width, as are those lines defining the left and right side of the pictograms. I'm not sure what those lines represent, maybe it's some kind of mat. But either way, when I look at the varying line widths here, it's more understandable to me that they are necessary. I think the beam would be harder to read if the beam and the beam legs were the same thickness of line. And so understanding that when looking at the gymnastics one makes me a little more open to the varying line widths in the archery one. Now, as far as the artistic swimming pictogram, I think it's one of my favorites in this whole series. I like that it still works and fits into the scheme despite not actually utilizing the crossing vertical lines. And I kind of enjoy that they've used the swimsuits without showing the bodies. It's quite pleasing to me how the water lines meet the swimsuits with sort of an implied outline around the swimsuits, so you get those nice gaps in there. The wavy line across the torso is a nice touch too, I think. It's all quite fluid, which is apt. If there's one hesitation for me here, it's maybe that I'm not totally sure that the curvature of those water lines is right. It feels like it could be closer to a smooth sinus wave. As I bring in the next set of 3 here, I want to mention that these things have been designed apparently by an agency called W in collaboration with Paris 2024 design teams. I'm sure that all those folks are more credentialed than I am, and they probably have, hundreds of years of cumulative design experience. And while I am pretty old, I can't really compete with that. So please know that any critique I have in this video is just the opinion of one guy and not some authoritative truth. Alright, so we're looking at athletics, which I guess is what we in the US typically call track and field. We got badminton and basketball. So for the athletics one, seems like a good decision to put the track on a 45-degree angle like that, but it does feel like it's kind of heavy on the diagonal speed lines here. It's like, what is this, a comic book? Also, the shoes look a little business casual to me, like what you wear to the obligatory after-work beer at the bar with your business bros. The badminton one also has those speed lines, but I think that works slightly better, although I'd be curious to see if it might not work with just a single line for each shuttlecock. And yes, that is what those things are called. Yeah, I think I would just do the central speed line for each one. That would also make the net read better, as it wouldn't be interrupted quite as much. The basketball pictogram is the first one we're seeing where the crossing diagonal lines I've been referencing are actually there, fully intact, in a thick line like that. Looks good, I think. I'll throw in the 3x3 basketball pictogram as well. I guess that's a demonstration sport this year, maybe? I think the 3x3 thing here is kind of impossible to read, honestly, in part because nobody's ever heard of 3x3 basketball. And by nobody, I mean me. But I've never heard of it. But I did used to play a computer game called 2-on-2 basketball back in like 1932. It was pretty good. Okay, so this beach volleyball one sort of amuses me because of those grains of sand. I can't quite place it, but I feel like there's some artist or maybe a comics artist or illustrator I'm thinking of who utilizes dots like that and just feels very, very mechanical. But like, I have to concede that I do get what this is communicating, so I don't really have any complaints. Although I will say, you know how the artistic swimming one used the swimsuits? I think it would be really, really funny if for the beach volleyball one, they just used an arrangement of thongs. No balls at all, just 4 thongs. That would go over well. And then these BMX ones, I feel like these are weaker than average because they don't seem to interact in a meaningful way with the crossing diagonals. It's like they just put some pictograms down and then added in remnants of those diagonal lines because they sort of have to be there, not because they're offering any additional meaning. I do sort of like that the freestyle one is distinguished by turning the bike upside down, implying acrobatics. It's sort of interesting too that I guess they use different helmets for these events. So it maybe makes sense to focus on that, but I don't know. Not my favorite. So for this boxing one, the use of the diagonal line and the omission of the opposing diagonal line is carrying meaning and making the pictogram stronger. The diagonal that's there helps the boxing gloves read as a head-to-head proposition. You know, one side against the other. The rendering of the boxing ring is, I think it's pretty good. It's implying the 3 ropes and it's creating ample negative space to give focus to the gloves. There isn't a lot of extraneous stuff going on. I think that's quite successful. Now this breaking one, on the other hand, so breaking, I believe, is break dancing, another demonstration sport. Why isn't that called artistic breaking, I wonder? But anyway, I'm not familiar with this as a sport, so I don't know if it's performed on a surface that looks anything like this speedy wheel nonsense I'm seeing here, but let's just say I hope so. I do like these shoes better than the track and field ones. And then the canoe slalom. Is this even real? I don't know, but I don't hate it. Although, isn't that a kayak? I've never heard of canoes being used in sport. Then again, do I look like an authority on sport? Don't answer that. Alright, more canoe sports. Looks like this one got stuck in an old TV antenna on somebody's roof. Now that thing is definitely a kayak. And then another distinguishable helmet for the mountain bike event. I kind of hate the speed lines, and again the diagonal lines aren't really doing anything here. Couldn't they have put the bike on a 45-degree angle so that one of the ever-present diagonals could imply either speed or the actual mountain the bike is on? And then cycling road. Okay, yeah, those are cycles, and those are roads, and those are speed lines. Cycling track. Okay, I like this better. The track is aligned with the diagonal, and the bikes are interacting with that. The fact that one of the speed lines connects to the diagonal makes it more tolerable for me as well. Nice. The diving one feels a little overly complicated maybe, but I kind of like how it's designed like a playing card. You know, like the king or queen playing cards where they're both right side up and upside down at the same time. That's actually pretty clever if you think about how divers are always rotating. Equestrian dressage. Yeah, that's dope. Love the negative space created by the horse heads. Love the diagonal line replaced by that thingy people used to like tell their horses what's up. And then there are two more horse ones. And you know what? These horse ones are just a really cool set. Maybe it's a little weird that there isn't really a sign of the diagonals in the equestrian eventing one. But at the same time, when you view all of these pictograms as a set, it's not crazy to have a couple where both of those lines are eliminated. They've done a good job overall, I think, varying how the various elements interact with or adhere to those lines. You've still got like 4 corners here, so you can still kind of fill in the lines in your head. For the fencing one, why do we need that center vertical? Are these 3 different kinds of swords, or whatever they're called? Oh, foils, I think. But they all have different handles. Is this some kind of thruple thing? Also, those helmets look kind of weird to me, but I'm guessing if you're more familiar with fencing, they look right to you. But this definitely lacks some of the clarity that I liked about the boxing one, for example. Alright, football. So I'm a big soccer fan, and this seems pretty strange to me. Like, what are those super fat speed lines doing? That looks whack. And then on the top and bottom here, is that like a zoomed in view of the pitch? I think the markings on a football field are beautiful and present some good opportunities to create a pictogram that works with the established grid system of the crossing diagonal lines. So I'll describe this one as a missed opportunity. The golf one I think is nice. It's interesting how they have the diagonal line doubled by the 2 clubs. I'm into the abstraction of those wavy lines as well, defining a green, I guess. I think it works. Maybe a slight question mark about the curvature of those lines, similar to how I questioned the curves in the artistic swimming one. But in both cases, those are not direct criticisms as much as just raising a question. And then handball is a sport I'm familiar with because I'm originally from Norway, where that sport is fairly popular. It's a totally different handball than what that means in the US. I like the ball, but I'm again less sure if this is interacting with the diagonals in a useful way. So this is hockey, or as I call it, the wrong kind of hockey, since it's not played on ice. But you know what? I think the pictogram is a good one. Maybe an even better version of the golf one, basically. And I like this judo one too. The X is creating a nice head-to-head setup, with a mat geometrically interacting with it as well. And again, we're using the outfits rather than the bodies, which is kind of interesting. And actually, as far as I understand, that choice throughout is one that was made consciously in an effort to be more inclusive, which is cool. So the idea is that quite a few of these symbols can be used for both the regular Olympics and the Paralympics because they don't involve specific bodies. So like the handball pictogram or the basketball pictogram is showing the court and the ball, and it doesn't care whether your body is leaping in the air or rolling in a wheelchair. So that's an interesting point and evidence of some new thought going into this set of designs. Anyway, marathon swimming, okay, glasses and a cap with some waves. I think here we're maybe implying a head-to-head competition that I think is not an actual feature of marathon swimming. I assume there are more than 2 athletes competing. And I don't really see anything suggesting great distance, although probably the idea here is that those are ocean waves as opposed to a pool, so I'll buy that. Okay, so for this one, I was going to say that it looks like they just put a lot of random things together, but then I realized this is the pictogram for the modern pentathlon, so I guess perfect. And the Rhythmic's gymnastics. Don't they mean rhythmic? Either way, this one is certainly distinct with those ribbons. I know they use balls too, but what are those rowing oars doing there? Oh, do they juggle those bowling pin looking things? Do I remember that right? Are they that long? I'm gonna guess yes and give this one a pass. Overall, it feels a little at odds with the other symbols because of all those curlicues, but it does then say something distinct about this sport, so I think it kind of works. And the thing is, each time something doesn't quite fit the template, it is also then expanding our sense of what the template is and what's allowed within it. So this is doing some work in that department. When you design symbols like this, you have to think about not just the thing you're designing, but also how that thing is going to fit into the greater context and how it's going to be a part of defining that greater context, right? Each piece is a part of a greater whole, and each piece is building that greater whole. So you shouldn't feel too restricted. You wanna end up somewhere that's still dynamic and shows some flexibility and variety within the system you're creating. The rowing pictogram has speed lines, but maybe I'm getting used to them or something, as I don't hate them as much here. They feel more appropriate as sort of water lines. This is Rugby 7. I have no clue what that is. How is there an Olympic event called Rugby 7, but not one that's just called rugby? I'm guessing those things are like the goalposts in American football? I don't know. I recuse myself from giving an opinion on this. The sailing one, I think, is way busier than it needs to be. Do I need to see that ski-like thing on the bottom of the boat? Doesn't that probably sit under the water? I don't know, maybe I'm wrong. And shooting. That's a sport America should dominate. I mean, sure, it's a target. Seems simple enough. Skateboarding, this one seems weird to me. I think a profile view of the board could have worked. You know, start with the X, take out one of the diagonal lines, then put wheels on the remaining diagonal, and voila, you'd have a skateboard. These boards look a little too much like Band-Aids, I think, which all skateboarders are too cool to wear. The sport climbing symbol is pretty cool. I instantly get what those shapes are. They're quite distinct, aren't they? I love it when something can be both incredibly abstract and incredibly literal at the same time. This just works. The surfing one feels a bit weird to me in that, it's sort of evoking a kind of flower. But you know what? I think I end up landing on approval here. I think this is an example of expanding what you can do with these symbols, how you can design something that exists within the rules of this design language, but still be a little free and playful. As I predicted earlier when we looked at marathon swimming, here we are referencing a pool through the depiction of lanes. I think this is clean, and it works, and it probably also makes the marathon swimming one work better if you look at them as a pair. And table tennis, yeah, that works for me. I really like how the end of the table becomes the inverted line that defines the paddle. I don't know why the net is extending beyond the table. That seems unnecessary. I'm not sure what is achieved by making that decision. And then Taekwondo, sure, similar to the Judo one we saw earlier, although not as strong, I think. But you also have to work with the graphic elements each sport suggests. Now tennis, that one's pretty pure. Interesting how they chose to represent the strings in the racket. There's no indication of a grid there, but I think ultimately it's probably a wise reduction. I like the rackets completely replacing our trusty old diagonal lines, and the tennis balls dotting out the opposite pattern. Very neat. And then this pictogram is for the sport of microchip manufacturing. No, this is trampoline gymnastics, and I'm not super familiar with that sport, but I'm guessing this is a reasonable depiction of the way that the trampolines look. Once again, here I'm skeptical about the implementation of the diagonal lines, although maybe they do carry some meaning here that I'm not aware of. The triathlon one feels rather weak, but of course the symbols that need to represent multiple events are particularly challenging to design. I wonder if there might have been a solution here where you could reduce the water to just 3 lines, and then you could have the road represented by 3 lines on the other side, the middle one stippled, and then you'd maybe be on your way to something a little simpler and cleaner. I am a bit surprised about these volleyballs. I wouldn't know that volleyballs look like that. The ones we saw in the beach volleyball one were instantly recognizable. I guess maybe volleyballs look like this nowadays, but then again, soccer balls haven't really looked like soccer balls for like decades, and yet the soccer ball symbol was very much a soccer ball. Obviously, part of the challenge here is that they needed to distinguish volleyball from beach volleyball. But again, that's why we needed those thongs earlier. By the way, lest you think that I'm being serious about that suggestion, please know that I'm joking and I'm very much aware of the controversies surrounding the outfits that female athletes are often made to wear. In the context of every other symbol, I think the water polo one works. It's certainly very easy to identify what sport this is. And you can't get much simpler than the weightlifting one. No notes from me on that one. And that brings us to this final one for wrestling. And I think, honestly, this one maybe reveals a shortcoming of the all outfits, no bodies approach, as I think these are just a little harder to read and they don't really convey the dynamism of wrestling. They look like stiff objects. I feel like when I picture a wrestler, they never really have their legs together like that. Anyway, I believe we've looked at every pictogram for the Paris 2024 Olympics, so what's the takeaway here? Well, usually, in previous Olympics, the pictograms have tended to be more sort of close-ups on bodies doing the sport. So those typically would be easier to read at smaller sizes, like in a lower third graphic on your old small TV. It'll be interesting to see how they use these, because I feel like some of them don't read all that well when reproduced at a smaller scale. I have seen some previews where they're pretty nicely animated, and so I think that's going to bring a lot of dynamism to these and make them feel modern and alive. And maybe this is an indication that they might introduce the symbols really large before showing them at reduced sizes, and that's how they'll help us better recognize the symbols. In a way, maybe it's unfair to review these as stills. Maybe it would have been appropriate to review animated versions of them, but I don't know, that's not really a purist designer take. I do think it's important that these things work as static symbols. Sometimes with Olympic pictograms, it's an opportunity for the host nation to showcase something unique to their culture. When my native Norway held the games in 1994, they used these pictograms inspired by ancient Norwegian rock carvings, which I thought was really cool. And the Barcelona ones 2 years before that, I believe, were inspired by the brushstrokes of Miro. And these Pyeongchang pictograms are based on the Korean script alphabet. I'm less convinced that these Paris pictograms say a whole lot about Paris or France. They feel more like the sort of artisanal Brooklyn beer brewery coat of arms from like 2015. I'd say that they've got a very universal feel, maybe a bit bland in terms of style, but doing them as these geometric coat of arms style designs with more complexity than we're used to is certainly a new approach to Olympic pictograms. So in that way, they are unique and distinct, and an argument can be and has been made, I think, that this is in some way representing the, let's say, artfulness of France. I'm not sure I fully buy that, but okay. So I've pointed out some of the ways that at least a few of these pictograms raise some questions for me. And I think there are some things worthy of criticism here, but at the same time, I think overall I kind of like these just because they are doing something I didn't expect. And I think they're also very clearly made for this era of motion design, which is kind of exciting for me. I introduced myself at the beginning of this video as a graphic designer, but I'm also an animator. I think there is a lot of room for innovation in Olympic pictogram design through animation. Alright, assuming the nation of France can survive until the end of July, let the games begin.